Hey all, Doom Eternal is perhaps one of the highest paced speedruns in speedrunning history, and that's not an exaggeration. There are lots of broken strategies like slope boosting, IDKFA, and yeet hooking that bust the game wide open and allow speedrunners to beat the game in under 19 minutes. This video is not about them. For every game-breaking strat that Doom Eternal offers you, there are ones that make you turn your head like a curious dog, and you ask, why? This is that video. I'll be covering everything from glitches that will end your speedrun, glitches that look like we sequence break the game, to minor glitches that look like nothing is going on. This game is broken, but it's also broken in the best way possible, and by analyzing all of it, I hope that you learn something that you'll never need to use. Pick up animation canceling. Starting off easy, every time you walk through a big question mark, the Doomslayer will stop and pick up something that's on the ground, like these cute toys and albums. And as much as I love the Cacodemon doll, yeah, you can be such a good boy, it's also slow. Turns out this game has something known as animation priority, as in, if another animation is more important than another, the less important animation won't play if they overlap. Speedrunners can use this to swap weapons and weapon mods in order to skip unimportant animations that stop you. The weirdest applicable case of this is at the very beginning of 100% runs. As runners need to collect this secret, they shoot and punch over this collectible. Regular punching won't work, but the punch animation from the pump state of the shotgun will animation cancel. Yeah, I don't understand it either. Diagonal dashing in water. Back in the old days of gaming, developers made that pressing one key would give you speed in one direction. For example, pressing W will give you 5 units of speed forward, pressing D would give you 5 units of speed to the right. This had the consequence that holding W and D at the same time would make the character go faster than holding one button. All my Pythagoras fans out there know that you're going faster by a factor of √2. Now, this was obvious in earlier games, and thus most modern games have patched this out and made it so that you have a maximum speed you could go. Except for Doom Eternal. Nah, just kidding. They did account for this. But not in water. Water is most quickly traversed by holding a diagonal direction and dashing. So close, id. So close. Pythagoras is rolling over in their grave. Momentum conservation through punchable walls. Alright, let's get a tag technical. Doom Eternal has these punchable walls that you can dash or punch through, hence the name. This would trigger a melee lunge from the Slayer, where the game would give speed to the punchable surface and stop the Slayer right in front of it. The melee lunge does not trigger if the Slayer aims at the edge of the punchable surface, but the punch still triggers. And since the lunge didn't trigger, the Slayer's momentum is unaffected and lets the Slayer keep momentum through the walls. Choco bar. So there are monkey bars in this game. If you go up to one, the Slayer will jump off the monkey bar and use it to traverse elsewhere. Chocolate Vinny found that turning around right before hitting the bar will skip the monkey bar animation. It's just that simple. We assume the developers added a line of sight detection so you don't accidentally grab a monkey bar when doing combat, since several of the arenas throughout the game heavily feature monkey bars. This is useful because sometimes taking a monkey bar slow when skipping it would, make you conserve all your momentum. Centered weapons. So you might ask speedrunners, why do none of you played with centered weapons? It's purely a cosmetic change, and it opens the right side of your screen to have more visibility. Well, I lied. There are gameplay consequences to it. The lock-on attachment for the rocket launcher actually locks on slower with weapons in center pose. This was fixed on a later patch of the game, or it's also fixed when the lock-on attachment is mastered. This small oversight caused base game speedruns to be slower because lock-on is a major weapon in the route for restricted categories. Not to mention, the one cycle kill on the Gladiator and Marauder are made impossible with centered weapons. Although this issue is fixed with the DLCs in Horde mode, because you start with all your weapons mastered. So, only Quarth gets to run with centered weapons, and I'm sure that they like it. Ramp hops. Let's talk about vectors. The jump mechanic in this game works by adding speed to the vertical plane of the Slayer. So, if you are walking up a slope with some velocity in the upwards direction, you actually get more height from a normal jump on a flat surface. But this also applies to bunny hops as well, covered more later. If you bunny hop on a sloped surface with a precise input, you can keep the increased speed you've had before and have it converted into the angle of the slope and then jump to gain even more height than previously thought possible. For example, edge ramp hops. This is the same principle as the previous section. However, the speed from the jump is added from another jump rather than walking up the surface. So, runners will start a jump, move into a ledge that has a jumpable surface, and then be able to jump to add to that previous jump speed, giving a mega jump. Lurch hops. So this game has a neat little detail that when you hit the ground, your character model will bob down and forward a little bit. This bob is actually proportional to the speed you hit the ground at. This little lurch is not a visual effect, it's an actual effect to the character model. And for the small duration, it gives you a little bit of speed. So, if you jump during this little animation, you get to keep the speed from the lurch and whatever speed you had beforehand. So when the Slayer gains speed from a bunny hop, it's from this little lurch animation. Cut speed. This game wants to keep you immersed in the gameplay, and in order to do that, it will interrupt your gameplay with cutscenes to show you obvious things that you probably could have figured out on your own if you looked around the arena for 5 seconds. So, the game tries to conserve your speed before and after these cutscenes, for immersion. This is combined with the dash to give the runner a huge amount of speed after the cutscene ends. To break it down, the dash has 3 components: the acceleration to dash speed, the plateau of dash speed, and the deceleration back to normal speed. So, if you dash into the cutscene at dash speed, midway through the dash sequence, the deceleration will never apply to the dash state because you're in the cutscene when the dash ends. So, you get to noom at the dash speed without ever slowing down. Fade-in boosts. Remember cut speed? Well, this is triggering cut speed on fade-in cutscenes. Basically, the dash begins at the beginning of the fade-in and is removed when the fade-in completes. Thus, you gain dash speed right when the runner fades in. This can be done with death planes, teleports, and even portals in some instances. Okay, I've only been speaking English my whole life. Urdak ring boosts. The momentum rings in Urdax give speed to the Slayer to complete platforming challenges. Dashing, when gaining momentum from these rings, lets the Slayer keep that speed, but change the direction. Why? Well, the state of the ring basically prevents the dash from changing the Slayer's velocity whilst in mid-ring. The 3-component curve never gets triggered, but the change to direction from the dash still gets triggered. Here are the weirdest glitches that speedrunners use, in my opinion. So let's just get into it. Sticky crits. So if you were programming a game on how to deal critical damage with a weapon, how would you do it? Would you have it to, whenever a bullet hits a critical point, it would deal critical damage? That's kind of stupid. You see, the sticky bombs are an alternate fire to the shotgun that do not obey logic when they get critical hits. Sure, you can hit a critical point for critical damage, but also, you don't. The main takeaway for why this happens is that the crit damage of the stickies is a state that can be triggered on and off. And this triggering can happen from more weapons than just the sticky bombs. So, if you land a sticky on an enemy and hit a critical point before the sticky grenades explodes, the game reads that as a critical point was hit and thus gives the sticky crit damage characteristics to the sticky. And the sticky in no way hit a critical point. You hit it with something else. Combine this with, say, the Flame Belch, which is a big cone that lights everything on fire. Aim this in a demon vaguely near the head, and guess what? You just hit the head hitbox. Now the sticky does extra damage for literally free. This can also happen with barrel explosions. One important thing to note is that if you hit a sticky headshot and then get a regular shot on the demon before the sticky explodes, you lose the crit state. The Boolean giveth and taketh away. Extra life warps. This game keeps track of your previous position whenever you leave the ground. When an extra life is used, the game teleports you to that previous position. So, what is done in an any percent run when they get to the first Arc Complex elevator? Breaking through the elevator sets the position at the breakpoint, and the Slayer gets close enough to the floor to trigger the elevator falling, but without updating the previous position. And now here is where we get technical. The elevator locks the Slayer's current position and applies speed downwards, to simulate an elevator. But since we're now above the elevator, we are doing this from out of bounds, of which the Slayer builds speed by ballista boosting, so when the movement is not locked anymore, all that speed sends the Slayer to the next trick. Another fun example is the Doom Hunter base Extra Life Warp. When triggering an extra life, the Doomslayer is not affected by most transitions. After destroying the breakable surface, the Doomslayer will have their movement locked, the screen will fade to white, and the Slayer teleported into the next section where the train arrives at the base. This section is long, and you can't move during it. So, speedrunners don't do that. They reduce their health to 0 right after breaking the surface with self-damage. This will trigger an extra life warp over the course of the trigger to lock Slayer movement. After the teleport, the runner can immediately move to a spot of collision to yeet themselves all the way to the end of the level. Zips Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, revisited with a revengeance. Alright, so I'm gonna admit an L on my part. I covered Zips in my many glitches video on Eternal. However, I didn't explain in much detail. I aim to rectify that here, because it's really interesting and, well, weird. This game has a mechanic in it known as dash gravity. This mechanic determines how much downwards acceleration the Doom Guy experiences while in the dash state. Dash gravity only happens when a dash goes from a ground state to an in-air state. If the Slayer triggers dash gravity and goes beneath 0.6096 meters, a grace period will trigger where after 100 milliseconds, if the Slayer is still beneath that line and still in the air, they will trigger a zip. The Slayer gains 609.6 meters per second downwards. For reference, this is 64 times faster than the walking speed. If the Slayer is above some slopes, his momentum gets directed into a usable direction to get to the end of the level. The observant among you may notice that the air threshold and the zip speed are very similar. The exact reason for why is that the speed is 1,000 times the threshold is unknown. However, it feels like it has to be related. If you can understand zips, you probably understand Doom Eternal more than anyone else. World Spear Fight Skip. So casually, this fight in World Spear has to be fought. A button has to be pressed, and only then can a ghost dog jump into a fountain to spawn in the next combat encounter. Yeah, turns out you don't need to do any of that. By getting a Hell Knight close to the fountain and kill it violently, the second fight in this area will spawn. No dog needed. Why does this happen? Well, I'm gonna have to explain to you what objects are in this game. Hi, I'm Rytro, and welcome to Game Maker's Toolkit. When you create a new entity for a game, you'll typically have types of entities for organization's sake. Like, you could have enemies, which stores all the information for demons. The Kako, Hell Knight, Marauder, and more all exist in this category. This makes programming easier, as objects in the same class share the same characteristics. For example, all demons must have a health pool and have a death state. Now, we don't know this for sure, but this is the tinfoil hat theory on why this skip works. The giblets that fall off demons are objects, and are in the same class of objects as the wolf. So, when the Hell Knight explodes, part of its giblets fall into the void beneath the fountain, hitting the trigger to where normally the wolf would hit it. Now, we think that this trigger only checks for the class of object and not the object itself, allowing it to go off and for you to start the second fight. Which is actually kind of really cool if you want to think the developers threw our speedrunners a bone, which they haven't done in a long time. We love you, id. Please stop patching speedrunner stuff. Frame rate dependent AI. Doom Eternal is a game that's held together with glue and tape, and not the good kind. And some features are directly tied into the amount of frames per second you're getting. Basically, the FPS is an indication of how fast your game can render the next section of gameplay. A faster frame rate means a smoothing image, provided you have a monitor that can see that change. Let's say, hypothetically, you develop a game that's meant to run at 60 frames per second. If you run it at 240 frames per second, you'd be running the game 4 times as fast because frames travel 4 times faster. That's no good. Developers realize this detrimental flaw and instead tend to operate on a tick rate system. Basically, they have it hard-coded into the game to only check for important values, like when damage is done, given, if you hit a death plane, did you die, and more, at a tick rate in the game. Most games use a tick rate of about 30 or 60 times per second. So things like movement of your playable character are updated with a frame rate, but interactive elements like damage, time, and other characteristics are determined by the tick rate. Doom Eternal does have a tick rate, but it's a crapshoot for what things that depend on the FPS or what things depend on the tick rate. Honestly, it seems like that there's no connection with something that's tick rate dependent or frame rate dependent. Take attacks from the Cacodemon. This big melee attacks movement is tied to FPS, meaning a 250 FPS frame rate will have the Caco launch across the room, but a 60 FPS frame rate will just be a typical lunge. Notable demons that also have this issue are Hell Knights, Doom Hunters, and actually a couple zombie attacks. If you're a PC player struggling with an Ultra Nightmare clear, opening up NVIDIA control panel and setting the frame rate to 60 will unironically be the biggest benefit to you. And it seems weird that you have to do that, but I digress. Hey y'all, thanks for watching. Yeah. Big shout outs to nobody. I did this all myself with literally no help, obviously. These names appearing on the screen mean absolutely nothing. I just want to say the previous videos I've worked on have gotten a lot of attention. I'm very thankful and hope you all have a great day. Peace.